Thank you. Are we on? Can you hear us? Okay,
Morning,
fantastic.
everyone.
So I'm Bobby Saxon,
Ron Graham.
Ron Graham, and we apologize the cover slide only had my picture on there.
He puts a better face on this than I do.
This is a scenario of where I said, let's do this, and then Ron went and did it for us. So that's why we're here as a team to co-present. We've only got about 20 minutes, and we're really going to share some of the good news story and the lessons learned about what we've accomplished at SOCIO, which is basically healthcare.gov. For those of you who are sitting in the audience who have thought about going to the cloud or maybe moved one or two things to the cloud, this is a story about taking an entire organization to the cloud. And as you're probably familiar, healthcare.gov did not get off to a great launch in 2013, but we now are in a phenomenal place, not only because we're in the cloud, but because we've spent the last two open enrollment periods with 99.8% uptime. And we did that partially in the cloud, and now we're fully in the cloud. And we want to talk about that story a little bit. So a little bit of background about what we do at healthcare.gov. We are a 24/7, 365 application, really a suite of applications, over 24 different systems that facilitate the purchasing of insurance and managing those accounts at healthcare.gov. We have had some systems that are in the cloud, but for the most part, we were a data center driven organization. And using our virtual data centers, we had 3 different data centers that we took advantage of. And we had all of the things that you would think of that would be in a data center. A couple of points here that are really important for us is that we were sized and priced for open enrollment, meaning that for us, really 3 days of the year, we needed to be able to handle 1 million or more people, in some cases 2 million people in a 12, 14-hour period coming into the system. So we had to build a very large implementation at our data centers, and we had to maintain that, and we had to pay for that. The second big point here is that we felt when we started digging into how resilient are we, that we had some weaknesses when it came to disaster recovery. So we used those 2 points along with a couple other points to try to justify our move to the cloud in the first place.
And if I could add to that, Bobby, if you think about the effort that it took not only to pay for having that system availability, but to maintain it year-round when we only needed that peak capacity for less than a couple months out of the year for open enrollment.
Yeah, today's April the 23rd. There may be 10,000 people going to the system.
Right.
There are 10,000 people in the first minute of open enrollment
Yep.
when that opens up on November the 1st. And so it was quite a substantial lift for us.
And if I could add, if a system could be a poster child, healthcare.gov was a poster child for cloud computing. So a great use case for it.
So the challenge by the numbers here, and Ron and I both will be talking about these slides really interchangeably here. So over 20 different applications, 80 different environments, and Ron kind of managed those. And Ron, you might want to speak a little bit to the challenge associated with that.
Absolutely. Different application teams, different business owners, competing interests, complex systems. Some that are independent, some that are highly dependent. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But and the culture of these teams are very different, but quite a challenge to manage that diversity and move things forward.
It says 2 petabytes worth of data up there, but really the number's probably like 5 or 6 petabytes because we didn't really manage our data storage, our archives, and our backups very well. So if we copied it, we kept it. If we shared it with someone, they kept it. And in our case, if we shared it with 6 or 7 someones inside of our organization, they kept it as well. That 2 petabytes references our operational data that we're using on a regular basis.
And one more point about the 80-plus environments, just to put that in context for you. What we're talking, is one primary production environment, but leading up to that are multiple application development teams working in lower environments from dev to test to integration to user acceptance, multiple environments to move different systems through their life cycle, ultimately into prod. So that's how we get to that number of 80 plus environments.
Lots of partners, lots of business owners, lots of people in our business on a daily basis who were concerned about what we were doing, whether we were or were not in the cloud, how it would impact them, and so on. So when we made the decision to go to the cloud, what we typically heard is, are you going to do a lift and shift, or are you going to do optimization and move applications to the cloud one at a time, or when they're fully optimized to the cloud? So we developed what we called the LISO approach. So the lift, improve, shift, and then optimize. And what this allowed us to do was to get going faster to make the move to the cloud happen, but it also forced us down a path that we were doing all we could to improve our organization so that the day that we went live in the cloud, we would be better. We wouldn't simply have picked up a bunch of virtual machines and moved them into the cloud. We will have improved ourselves. And we'll talk about some of the successes associated with that in a few minutes. But that approach, and we kind of did the LIS portion first, and now we are into the optimization phase.
And if I could add, when Bobby came on board as the Chief Technology Officer and launched this initiative, this was perhaps one of the smartest piece of guidance that we were able to give the teams that helped shape our decision making. Very key to our ability to.
And I told Ron every time he called me smart, I'd give him a $20 bill. So, yeah. No, what happened is I was like most of you. I was sitting in these audiences over and over and over, hearing people talk about going to the cloud. I got to CSIO almost 2.5 years ago, and I saw that we were about 10 or 15% in the cloud. But we had no plan, no strategy to take the rest of the organization to the cloud. We talked about it a lot, but we didn't do it. And so after asking a lot of questions, doing a lot of analysis, speaking to the folks on the ground that really knew our organization, I could not come up with a good reason for us not to be in the cloud. But I could come up with lots of good reasons that we should be in the cloud. So in November of 2017, the mandate was issued that we would be in the cloud, and then we'd be in the cloud in about 16, 17 months. And off we went from that point.
Okay. So key to our ability to plan our strategy was to understand the nature of our systems. And it was clear to us right from the onset that this was not going to be a big bang cut over to the cloud. The complexity of these systems and the number of stakeholders involved in competing interests necessitated a strategy to help manage our way through this. So we came up with groupings of systems based on their affinity. And so you see here, we came up with 3 groups. The first group was fairly independent systems. They were smaller, less complex, no real dependencies on one another, no real dependencies on our healthcare.gov business cycle. So we were able to group those systems together and manage them as a group, if you will. The second group of systems were somewhat dependent. They were not as tightly coupled with each other, but there were dependencies on some of the group 3 systems, which we'll talk about, and they exchanged data with other systems through file transfer interfaces. So we're able to group those systems together. And third was the large group that was tightly coupled. They all had to go together. Their processes were highly integrated, their data was highly integrated. There was no way to easily separate them. They all had to migrate together. So we came up with these groupings. The value of that was we were able to come up with a project management approach to coordinate and plan out these efforts based on the groupings.
And this is a really good time to call out the vendors that we work with on our program every single day. Ron is amazing at what he gets accomplished, but we could not do it without trusted partners who knew our systems even better than we know our systems, because how we would take a piece out and move it into the cloud and not disrupt, not go down as an organization it really was complex. And so thanks to our vendors for being able to help us do that.
And adding to the challenges, these systems did not stop in their development. There were ongoing releases, ongoing business priorities that had to be met. So at the same time that we were planning the move to the cloud, we're also updating and maintaining our production systems to meet business demands.
Yeah, that's a really critical point. Our organization goes on a yearly cycle of what's the current law, what's been updated, how does it need to be implemented from an IT point of view, and we're driving every year to November the 1st. We got to get all those changes in place, get them fully tested, feel comfortable with them, and then go live with open enrollment. We never stopped any of that in order to go forward with this.
In addition to upgrading all the infrastructure and technology products that keep the site going as well. So, and security patches and all those kinds of things.
So Ron, I think this is probably a good slide for you
okay,
as well.
So first, in our phase approach, the first thing, in addition to the groupings, we identified those key enabling services that had to be stood up in the cloud in order for any of the groups to migrate. Things like DNS naming, our batch scheduling technology, which is TWS, electronic file transfer, which was one of the key tools that we needed there in order for some of these systems to migrate. So setting up those core services is very key. The important thing here too is a lot of these core services were handled by our on-prem data center service providers. Moving to the cloud redefined some of those responsibilities. So we had to deal with how to adjust our environment to cater to the fact that we no longer had those on-prem data center services, and more responsibility fell onto the application development teams. And we also had to rely on our cloud services provider, who is GDIT, to help with some of that as well.
This made us stronger as an organization because we were kind of outsourcing some of this stuff. But we had to figure out how to do this work ourselves and then how to parse it across our suite of vendors that we were working with.
Yep.
It was exciting to see. During open enrollment, we spend a lot of time in our operations center. Every day we're waiting for something to break so we can fix it immediately. But when you're sitting around most time waiting, and in our case waiting a lot because the system was very stable, to see our vendor partners on their computers working on training and certifications on some of the stuff that we're talking about here, we grew as an organization because we were all in and we all had to go back and enhance our skills in order to make this happen. So some lessons learned during this approach is communicate clearly. We are in the process of bringing together documentation so that we can share this story in a written format. This is a little 20-minute tease on that. But we learned along the way that, no, I meant this, not what you just did or what you've been planning on. And so we learned we had to work on that. We also had to work to make sure that our stakeholders, our business partners, especially internal to SCIO, understood the cloud move, because there was a lot of anxiety that we were not planning on, that our internal partners were like, oh my God, we're going to the cloud, and how's that going to impact me? Well, in some cases, it's not going to impact you at all, but we had to stand up briefings to bring those folks on board. Go ahead, Ron.
And I can't underscore enough the importance of the communications, not only communications internally amongst our technical teams and our management teams, but also externally with a lot of our stakeholders. Healthcare.gov relies on a lot of external partners to deliver its service. Other federal agencies like IRS and SSA, Homeland Security, state Medicaid agencies, lots of insurers, they all connect in and use the site. They all had to know what our plans were, so we had to be able to communicate early and often about what we were doing, how it was going to affect them, the deadlines, and what the ramifications would be of the strategy. So communications is key.
And for those senior IT leaders in here, we're already getting to 5 minutes, so I'll skip that.
Right.
We're going to go 5 minutes over, I have a feeling. So, okay, so here, do no harm. Open enrollment is the most important thing that we do every year. We could not do anything that would impact open enrollment. We literally prepped and moved some systems during open enrollment.
Yep.
And the premise is do whatever you can, but do not mess up open enrollment, because that will be the chopping of your head that will happen. And we did a lot of extra planning associated with those kinds of moves out there. I'm going to skip a couple. I'm going to build this out and let Ron talk to it.
Yeah, when we talked earlier about the group strategy, you can see here we had some early wins with the first group, and independent systems. Go right ahead, Bobby, and build it out. You can see how along the way we started in earnest in September, had some early wins. By the time we got to the beginning of the year, January 2019, we'd already made substantial progress in migrating systems to the cloud. That middle group is where our Group 2 systems that relied on EFT was stood up, and that enabled a lot of things to go forward. We also got started early in the data migration, which was a huge challenge. We've got huge volumes of data that needed to be moved. And key to that was standing up a pre-prod environment in our cloud in AWS so that we can get started early with migrating the data. That was the long pole in the tent. And ultimately, by March, we had everything up in the cloud.
Another key point here is it wasn't just early wins, it was also early education.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as we did something, we learned quickly that we had to truly be a badgeless organization, and that if one organization learned something, it had to be shared with everyone else. And learning sometimes was not necessarily positive, it was also negative. What happened? How can we prevent it in the future? What does everyone else need to know in order to make it happen successfully? And so by getting started slowly and then ramping up, we were able to take full advantage of our vendor-partner relationships and sharing of information, and our teams were excellent.
Our teams were absolutely. Okay.
So have a plan B, C, and D.
Yep.
One of the things that we said all along, I've said in plenty of these talking about going to the cloud, and they never fail. They're always great, and it went seamlessly, or at least that's what I walk away from every time, thinking we'll never be able to do that. The approach that we took is we are going to share the good, the bad, and the ugly because we want the rest of the federal government to learn from our lessons out there. And sometimes your plan A doesn't work. You go to your plan B. Moving data, for example, is a great story associated with that. And so you have to have multiple plans in order to be able to do that.
Yep. Part of that, too, is that we had a multi-pronged strategy for dealing with our data. We realized early on that upgrading our network was a key part of it. We also relied a lot on Amazon snowballs to move data, which in itself created a number of challenges for us that we did not quite anticipate. Ended up having to rely a lot on Amazon to help us get past it. So did the data, the upgrades to the network was really our savior. Got started early, took a long time to do it, but once that was done, that cleared a pathway for a lot of the data movement to occur, unencumbered by some of the snowball challenges.
And no hit to Amazon because we are in Amazon, but the snowballs ended up not being very good for us. And it was fortunate that we had a plan B that we were working simultaneously because we ended up having to take advantage of that.
Getting the 1 minute call.
Yeah, we're going a little fast because we're going to go a few minutes over. So I'm just giving you a heads up on that. So I've already spoken to a couple of these things here.
I will add one point about security. We ended up having to re-ATO all of our systems. So working with our security partners was very key. Getting all these systems reauthorized to operate in the cloud, that was one of the key challenges that we had to deal with.
Communications, we talked about this a little bit. Communicate often, communicate openly, and then re-communicate.
I will say we had a great team. Our systems integration team did a lot. I can't thank them enough for all the effort. We had not only a good, strong technical team, but we had a project management team that just focused on organizing the groups, planning the projects. We met daily, oftentimes multiple times a day, coordinating with the teams, communicating with our stakeholders. That was very key to our ability to be successful here.
So strong executive support. If you're going to be a senior leader supporting your cloud move, you got to have backbone. You got to be positive. You got to be willing to tell people no, and then sometimes you got to go, "What the heck are you thinking?" Because your teams can do it. Mm-hmm. When we moved to the cloud, the big bang, the last day, we did that in under 21 hours. The original plan that was presented to me was like 14 days of downtime for healthcare.gov in order for us to make that move. I didn't know how long it would take, but I knew it wouldn't take 14 days. So my answer was no. And back they went. And they kept driving it down and driving it down. By the time we got ready to go, it was a 21-hour set of downtime. Yep. The community approach here, I can't say enough about our vendor partners, about our stakeholders, about our federal partners. communicate, and drive people to a team approach. And I'm not going to get up here and name all of our vendors because I'd leave some out, but we're at a GDIT event. We've got Amazon Cloud, and we've got other big primes out there that helped us out. And without their skill set, without their willingness to be partners,
and their knowledge of our systems.
Yes, and sometimes, they work together, but they're not partners. But in our case, we forced them into that. They then embraced it, and it helped us all be better. Just said most of that right there. So this basically says here several things. Probably the key thing is that we did this move in a little over a year. We anticipate a lot of savings going forward. As I told my boss when we started down this path, I said the best way to save a lot of money by moving to the cloud from a data center is to have really bad data center contracts. And then you look a lot better when you get over into the cloud. So part of this is as a result of that. But we had gotten ourselves into a bad place, and we needed to fix it. We needed to fix our architecture. We needed to fix our disaster recovery. We needed to give ourselves elasticity. We needed to do things that would make us stronger as an organization. And in the process of doing that, we also made our contracting a whole lot better.
All right.
And then here, the before and after. I think you all know from listening to other folks talk about moves to the cloud. Significant improvements. 2 quick stories, and then we'll wrap it up right here. In one case, when we moved to the cloud, we wanted to address disaster recovery. So in the process of addressing disaster recovery, we built redundancy into nearly everything. What we didn't have in our data centers, we took full advantage of all things cloud in order to make ourselves redundant. One of our first organizations to move, they were kind of complaining a little bit about the move and the effort and all this other stuff. And after they got into the cloud, a few days later, they went, hey, we noticed an anomaly. What they found was they had failed over without ever actually knowing they had failed over. And that would have been downtime for their system. But because we'd built the redundancy in there, we were able to take advantage of that. We also had an Exadata system. And we had it in our data center because we were told years ago we needed to have an Exadata system to do all this stuff. And we said that Exadata system stays in that data center. It does not go into the cloud with us. On the first day, we were performing better with that system in the cloud than we were on an Exadata system. And over a few weeks, we significantly enhanced our performance because of us going to the cloud. So you can rethink and innovate and be creative with your solutions when you go to the cloud because it just gives you so many other possibilities out there. Ron?
And I'll say, now that we're there, this is really just the start of the journey. We've gotten off to a good start, and I think that's kind of what the next slide, Bobby, is taking us to. Although it says mission accomplished, yes, we migrated, but our journey into the cloud and our optimization, the O and LISO, that phase is now just starting in earnest. We're rethinking our plans and retooling ourselves to take advantage of the capabilities that the cloud has to offer. And that's very much our focus right now.
And that's it. I know you have lots of questions, but apparently we'll be standing out in the hall if you'd like to come ask them those questions. Thank y'all very much. Thank y'all.